Welcome, listener. Tonight, we travel not just through shadows, but through memory, in forgotten corners of Eastern Europe, where frost lingers longer and legends grow roots deeper than memory. There are places the light avoids. One such place is Starowods, a village no map dares name, where the trees remember what men have tried to forget. And at its edge stands a crooked oak, ancient and waiting. The locals call it the gallows tree, but this is not just a story of rope and sinnet. It is a story of what happens when the past is never buried deep enough, and something buried learns how to wake. Dawn broke slow over the village of Starowods, casting a dull, cold light on frost-bitten earth. The sky, choked with heavy clouds, barely allowed the sun to breathe through. As if the heavens themselves wished not to witness what was to come, the villagers had already gathered near the oak tree, just beyond the outer fields, an ancient, gnarled thing that loomed above them like a crooked finger pointing toward something unseen. No one called it by its proper name anymore, if it ever had one. To the young, it was simply the hanging tree. To the old, it was the gallows tree. But to Father Marek, it was a wound in the land, a thing that bled silence and remembered pain. He stood with his hands clasped in prayer, the crucifix around his neck cold against his chest. His eyes remained shut as the condemned man was led forward, Janek, the lame. A petty thief, hardly dangerous, but caught breaking into the magistrate's granary during the winter rationing. 3 times a thief, the town constable said. 3 times the rope. No one spoke as the rope was slung over the lowest bough, a thick limb that curved downward unnaturally, as if eager for its purpose. The hangman, a somber, nameless figure cloaked in wolfskin and shadow, tightened the noose without malice or mercy. Janek said nothing. He didn't beg. Perhaps he knew better. The tree did not favor those who cried. The lever was pulled, a creak of wood, a snap, a single, short gasp, then silence again. Father Marek opened his eyes and looked not at the body, which turned slowly in the wind, but at the tree. He stepped forward, ignoring the murmurs behind him, and pressed a gloved hand against the bark. It was warm, not sun-warmed, alive-warmed. He closed his eyes again and whispered, that was the 100th. He knew because he had counted. He'd kept record, alone, in his study where mice chewed at the corners of half-lit parchment. From ancient scribes, oral confessions, even dreams, he traced every hanging on that tree. The earliest record dated back nearly 300 years. Milosh, the heretic, burned first, hanged second. They had hung his ashes in a sack to complete the rite. And now Janek. 100. As the villagers dispersed, some shaking heads, others clutching their children tight to Father Marek, lingered. The sky darkened again, clouds swallowing the weak light. The priest looked up. For a moment, he could swear the boughs of the tree had shifted, ever so slightly inward, like arms closing in prayer. He returned to the chapel by mid-morning, but the chill never left his bones. That night, as winds whipped the thatch rooftops and wolves howled farther out than usual, the bark on the gallows tree cracked, not from cold, not from wind, but from within. Long, thin lines appeared on the surface of the wood, spiraling like veins or words written in an alphabet no one remembered. At the center, just above where the noose had swung, a shallow carving bled a single bead of sap. It shaped itself into the number 100 by dawn. The sap had hardened like amber, golden and still, and somewhere deep in the earth, below the tangled roots that had drunk blood for centuries. Something blinked awake in the days that followed Yannick's execution. The air in Starawad's changed. The children were the first to hear it. It began with Anja, daughter of the village miller. She was no older than 8, curious as a fox, and known to wander. Her mother scolded her for it, especially after the hanging, but Anja had always found the woods peaceful, calmer than the heavy silences of adults. And more honest. It was 2 days after Yannick's execution when she first strayed near the gallows tree. The snow around its roots had melted in a perfect ring, though no fire had been lit. Its bark gleamed as if freshly polished, the sap from the strange new carvings reflecting the cloudy sky like glass. Anja didn't go too close. Even she, with all her boldness, felt something sour in the air. Still, as she crouched behind a low bush, the wind died completely. The birds hushed, the world turned hollow, and that's when she heard it. A voice not loud, but so sharp it sliced through silence like ice on skin. It didn't come from the air, or from above. It came from the bark, from within the tree. "Come closer, little one." Anja stood so fast, she nearly toppled backward. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped animal. She stared at the tree, certain it had not spoken, certain she had imagined it. Then she heard it again. "You're cold. I remember warmth. Let me remember more." Anja ran. Her small boots left a crooked trail through the slush as she sprinted back to the village. Cheeks red, mouth sealed, she told no one. That evening, another child, Miko, son of the blacksmith, failed to return home. The search began at sunset. Dozens combed the woods with torches and dogs, calling his name until their throats burned. By midnight, the snow began to fall again, fine and soft, erasing footprints as if the land wished to forget. Miko was never found, but the next morning, when the light touched the gallows tree once more, the villagers who dared pass it saw something new, a name, freshly carved into the bark, smooth as if etched by a master's hand, in letters too perfect to be made by any human blade. Makotha Constable claimed it must be some cruel prank, children carving names, spreading panic. But Father Marek said nothing. He simply stared at the name for a long while, lips moving in prayer, hands trembling. He knew no one had carved it. He had seen the bark the day before. He had touched it. It had been whole. The villagers grew uneasy. The tree, once grim but accepted, now seemed aware. The air around it buzzed faintly, like a low hum just below hearing. The snow around its roots never stayed long, melting into dark pools that gave off a faint smell, wet iron and something sweeter, something rotten at night. Children cried in their sleep. Mothers woke with scratches on their windows, though no animals were seen. The village dogs refused to go near the eastern field. Then came the second name, Aliska, a girl of 11, still very much alive. But after her name appeared, her voice was gone, no wound, no sickness. She opened her mouth to speak, and nothing came. The village healer said her tongue was intact, her mind sound. She simply could not speak, as if something had taken her words. Father Marek locked himself in the rectory for 2 days. He pored through texts he hadn't touched in years, books with cracked spines and ink that faded like ghosts. He began to see a pattern. The tree did not just kill, it remembered that every name etched was a name claimed. Some by rope, some by fear, some by silence, and now, with 100 souls within its grain, it was no longer sleeping, it was whispering, waiting, and choosing. By the end of the week, 2 names had appeared on the bark, one boy gone and one girl silenced. And still, the villagers clung to disbelief, as if naming a thing made it more real. But Father Marek could not pray it away, and so, in the grey hours, before dawn, he reached for the past. The letter was written hastily, smudged with wax and ash, sealed with the sigil of a broken cross. Father Marek had not written to the Abbey of Krakow in over a decade, but this was beyond his capacity now. He needed someone who remembered what the church had tried to forget. The man arrived 4 days later, Brother Shimon bent-backed and brittle-boned, rode into Starwoods beneath a sky stained yellow with frost. His robes were patched in places, thick with the dust of older roads. He carried no cross, only a satchel of ancient texts, and the scent of vinegar and old paper clung to him like a second skin. The villagers avoided him, too pale, too quiet, too still. But Father Marek embraced him like a brother, and together they walked to the gallows tree under the weight of more than weather. Shimon stood before the oak in silence for a long while, fingers pressed to the markings like a blind man reading scripture. The wind blew across the field, but he did not move. He traced each line, each swirl, each name. Then he stepped back and said, softly, "This is not Latin, not Greek, not even Old Polish." Father Marek frowned. "Then what is it?" Shimon glanced around, checking that no ears but trees listened. "It's pre-Christian, pagan runes, Proto-Balto-Slavic. If I had to guess, a dead dialect, spoken only in blood rites and burial songs." Father Marek swallowed. "What does it say?" The old scholar sighed and knelt at the base of the tree. His breath misted like incense in the cold. "It's not a sentence," he said. "It's a litany, names, invocations, possibly offerings." He tapped the bark near the oldest carvings, barely visible now under the new ones. "Here, these are older than your church, older than this village. They're etched from within the wood, not cut in. You cannot make marks like that with any tool." Father Marek paled. "You're saying the tree itself is carving them?" Shimon didn't answer. Instead, he unrolled a yellowed parchment from his satchel and inked sketch of a stone idol, unearthed decades earlier in the forests near Pomerania. It was crude, with 3 hollow eyes and a jagged mouth, all carved into a column of black granite. Below it, a ring of trees leaned inward as if in supplication. This figure, Shimon explained, was worshipped by a long-forgotten sect. They believed in a god of punishment and memory, a being who held justice not as mercy, but as transaction. He pointed at the mouth of the idol. The faithful were to feed it names of the guilty or the cursed. In return, it would grant prosperity, protection, or vengeance. Marek looked back at the tree. "You'd think, this is one of those gods." Shimon shook his head. "No, but I think it may be a vessel, a replacement. When the old stone was shattered by missionaries, perhaps something moved, something that needed wood and blood and ritual to continue its worship." He stepped forward, lowering his voice, "And now, with 100 names carved, it has awakened." That night, the bell above the chapel rang thrice, though no one pulled the rope, and at the edge of the village, by the gallows tree, a new carving appeared in the snow, not on the bark, on the ground, spelled with shards of bone. Arranged in perfect lettering was a word neither Shimon nor Marek had ever taught the villagers. "Remember," in a dialect that had died 1,000 years before, even after Shimon's grim revelations. Father Marek hoped knowledge might be enough to defeat what they were facing. But knowledge does not erase sin, it only names it. And sin, instead, had deep roots. Rona had lived longer than anyone in Starowad's remembered. She was once the village midwife, a figure both respected and avoided. Children whispered that she had the evil eye. Mothers swore she knew herbs that worked better than prayer. Fathers called her which when ale loosened their tongues. Now she was simply old, nearly blind, bones bent like willow roots, skin thin as milk skin on hot soup. She hadn't left her cottage in years, but word travelled and the tree had changed. And now her sleep was no longer quiet, because her son had come back. It began with dreams. He would stand by her hearth, not older than the day he died, still wrapped in swaddling, soaked with grave dirt. His skin was blue, his eyes black like beetle shells. But he smiled. "Mama," he would whisper, "I'm still warm under the tree." By the third night, Rona could no longer hold the weight of silence. She sent for Father Marek with a ragged note scrawled by shaking hand. "The tree has come." For me, Father Marek arrived at her cottage before dawn. Brother Shimon not far behind. They found her wrapped in blankets, skin yellow with time and fear. A dozen herbs burned in clay bowls around her rosemary sage. Elder bark, but the air still smelled of moss and rot. She looked at them both and spoke with no preamble. "You've seen the child, haven't you?" Father Marek hesitated. "What child?" Her mouth curled. "Not a smile. The boy in the woods. The one who doesn't blink." They said nothing. She laughed, but it was a dry, hollow sound. "I gave him to the tree." The story spilled out like bile. 53 winters ago, she had birthed a stillborn son in a snowstorm. Her screams were covered by the wind. No one came. Alone and broken, she cradled his tiny, lifeless body for hours. Then, near midnight, something knocked at her door. She never opened it, but she heard it speak through the wood. "Give him to me, and I will give him back." At first, she thought it was madness, but the voice was not imagined. It was old, dry as dust, slow as tree growth. It promised warmth, breath, life, and grief-drunk desperation. She wrapped the infant in black linen, walked barefoot through the snow, and placed him at the foot of the gallows tree. She waited. The next morning, the linen was gone, and so was the cold. 3 days later, she found the child in her arms, breathing, warm but changed. He did not cry, he did not sleep. He stared, always stared. As the years passed, he grew but never aged. His skin stayed pale, his nails blackened. He ate nothing, drank nothing, and he never blinked. Eventually, she told the villagers he had died again, fever in the lungs. But the truth was, she buried an empty box. The boy wandered the woods, never far from the tree, watching, waiting. "He is the first name," she whispered now, clutching Marek's hand. "The first offering. I fed it once, and now it's hungry." It never stopped. Her voice cracked. "You must burn it." Marek said nothing, because he had tried. Just yesterday, with Shimon and a group of men, he had lit oil-soaked logs at the base of the tree. The flames had roared, but the bark had hissed back, and the fire had died like a candle in windless air. The tree would not burn. Shimon believed the roots went too deep, deeper than the village, deeper than history itself. As Rona wept, her son appeared once more. Not in dreams this time. He stood beyond the window, face pale, lips unmoving, his eyes fixed not on her, but on Marek. Rona gasped. He's chosen you. Marek stood, frozen. Then the boy smiled and vanished into the fog. The next morning, Rona was found dead in her bed, her hands stretched toward the hearth where she'd left a scrap of black linen outside her cottage. Nailed into the bark of her door was a twig cross-snapped clean down the middle, and beneath it, scratched into the wood with nails or teeth, "She fed me first." Rona's death should have brought relief, or at least an end to the madness, but instead, it made everything worse. The chapel bell began to ring at dusk, always 3 times, always on its own. No one touched the rope. No one was inside. The candles refused to stay lit. The holy water grew green with mold, and the crucifix above the altar, wooden, once steady, began to tilt slowly to the left, again and again. No matter how many times Father Marek corrected it. Then came the tremor. It struck without warning just before Sunday Mass. A low, short quake that cracked the stone beneath the lectern and split open the floor. The choir fled. The children screamed. The church emptied in seconds, leaving only Marek and Shimon to stand over the fractured earth. From the darkness below, they heard it, breathing with lanterns and shovels. They dug beneath the chapel. Buried in silence and centuries of dust were roots, thick, black, pulsing roots. They twisted together like veins beneath flesh, moist, warm, alive. The stone foundation had grown around them like scar tissue. Shimon dropped to his knees. "This is why the fire didn't work," he whispered. "It's not just a tree anymore." Father Marek could barely speak. "It's part of the land." She nodded. "No, ... It is the land." The roots stretched in every direction, a ward, homes, wells, graves, fields. The village had been built not just near the gallows tree, it had been built around it, fed by its memory, fed by its hunger. They both stared down into the pulsing dark. No Latin rite could purge it. No sacred fire would touch it. The tree wasn't sleeping anymore. It was awake, and it was inside everything. For 3 nights after that, Marek did not sleep. He walked the perimeter of the village, lantern in hand, whispering psalms to a sky that would not listen. He heard no birds, not even wolves, only silence, and the soft tremor of roots breathing beneath his feet. And in the final night before the solstice, when the moon hung like a sealed eye above the chapel, Father Marek knew what had to be done. It was on the coldest morning of the year that he stepped onto the gallows alone. No trial, no sentence, no rope drawn by another man. He wore his vestments, not for show but for the people. They needed to believe he was doing this out of faith, because he was. He stood beneath the same branch that had held Yannick, that had held me, that had held them all. And for the last time, he looked to the sky. For the first time in weeks, the sun pierced the clouds. He smiled and kicked the stool. The rope went taut. The tree shuddered. Its bark cracked open, bleeding sap and smoke. Every name etched upon it began to glow, one by one, until the entire trunk pulsed like a furnace. From the roots beneath the church to the tips of its branches, the gallows tree burned from within. But the fire did not spread. It consumed only the tree. Villagers gathered at the edge of the field, watching in reverent silence. No one dared speak. No one dared move. When the fire died, nothing remained but a blackened stump, and a single object resting in the ashes. Father Marek's crucifix. In the days that followed, the snow returned. The birds came back. The children stopped dreaming, but the stump remained warm to the touch. And in the stillest hours before dawn, if you listened closely, you could still hear the wind rustle, a voice that was not quite gone. 101. And so, the roots sleep, once more hidden beneath snow and silence, waiting, listening. Thank you for walking with us through shadow and sorrow. If the wind whispers tonight, don't be afraid. It's only the story lingering a little longer. Until we meet again in the dark, good night, and may your dreams be quiet.